By the time you watch this on the clip version, it'll be the day after St. Patrick's Day. But if you're watching live, as you lovely people are, it is St. Patty's Day, and we thought we should close out the YouTube portion of the show at least with this. Great Irish famine historians issue St. Patrick's Day statement on Gaza. A group of historians is urging Irish Americans to use their influence to avert a famine in Gaza as severe as the one faced by their Irish ancestors. The below letter was shared with Irish Central by signatory Dr. John Cunningham of the University of Galway today, Friday, March 15th. So this was from a couple days ago, just before the weekend. The Irish famine of 1846 to 1850 resonates throughout Irish and American history. During the famine and in its aftermath, 2 million or more survivors emigrated to the United States, determined to make better lives for themselves. Many nursed a sense of the injustice that had brought starvation to their families and neighbors, and passed this to their children and to later generations. Just last year, during his Irish visit, President Biden spoke to crowds in Dundalk and Ballina about the tragedy of the famine and its impact on his own family. As historians of the Irish famine, we are conscious of the horrific effects of mass starvation, including the trauma it leaves in its wake. Alert to the threat of famine throughout the world in our own time, we are alarmed at its imminence in Gaza and are strongly urging here that every possible step be taken to prevent it. As a descendant of great famine survivors himself, and with the capacity to influence the situation, President Biden carries a particular responsibility, especially as evidence of impending calamity emerges on a daily basis. The circumstances of Ibrahim al-Karabishi of Jabalia in northern Gaza, quote, reduced to scavenging for cheeseweed and grasses to boil for his children, carry uncanny echoes of the Irish famine. According to the Financial Times, Ibrahim is one of 300,000 in the north of Gaza who have faced a descent into hunger and starvation that has been precipitous. The family of Rami Tarazi, sheltering in the Greek Orthodox Church of St. Porphyrius, pardon me if I got that wrong, state that they rely mainly on bread made from barley and corn used for fodder. A kilogram of Egyptian rice costs $28, 10 times the norm, putting it out of reach for almost all families in the region. There are many other such stories. Alex DeWall of Tufts University, a world authority on famine, sketches the probable course of developments. Quote, young children and the elderly will starve first. Then it will be women who save their last scraps of food to try and keep their children alive longer. Diseases like cholera will rampage through overcrowded camps. With 10 children reliably reported last week to have died of starvation at the Kamai Adwan Hospital, the process outlined by DeWall is already underway. More than with most famines, this is an avoidable catastrophe. With its restrictions on the distribution of food aid, water, and medical supplies, Israel is manifestly causing the famine as it wages war. In this, it is facilitated by the United States, which continues to arm Israel and give it political cover through the use of its veto at the United Nations Security Council. In recent U.S. announcements, there is a measure of recognition of the gravity of the situation in Gaza, but the practical measures which followed are inadequate. Airdrops will not stop famine, nor will the proposed maritime corridor between Cyprus and Gaza relieve starvation on the necessary scale. On this St. Patrick's Day in an election year, we are appealing to the conscience of Irish America. We ask Irish Americans in their capacity as citizens, as members of cultural and benevolent societies, as political leaders, to use their influence to avert a famine as severe as the one faced by their ancestors. To do this, it is necessary that the U.S. ceases arming Israel, that it puts pressure on Israel to halt its military action and lifts its blockade on Gaza, that it refrains from using its veto at the UN Security Council in relation to Palestine, that it restores funding to UNRWA, the agency best equipped to provide relief, that it acts as an honest broker to bring about an agreed political settlement between Israel and Palestine, signed the following here. Once again, the Irish establishing themselves the most based people in Europe. So well done. My mother-in-law's cat died yesterday, and so I had to explain to my boys, because they go over there almost every day, just to hang out so I can get some work done here at home. And we had to explain to them last night that the cat died and you wouldn't see it anymore. And they took it well, and then they asked me today, they say, do people die? And I had to explain that to them. And it's a tough thing to explain to a kid. They took it pretty well. Maybe they have my morbid genes in them where it doesn't bother them as much as it would most kids. But the point is, you're talking about children who shouldn't even know what death is yet. My guys didn't even know what death was until yesterday. And you're talking about thousands of kids who are now facing this, who shouldn't even understand what they're facing. They shouldn't even understand what is at stake for them. And now on top of the bombing campaigns, you're going to have thousands more die from hunger. Hunger? You saw the price of rice. You saw what families are going through to feed kids. So, on St. Paddy's Day, we thought it was good to read that, because they're absolutely right, and good on them for writing that.
Well, this is why at this point, if you notice, except for the people who are on the grift, who are making a living off of this, who are in politics, most of the Zionists that you may know have fallen pretty silent publicly. Because they're starting to more and more realize what they're getting connected to, what they're going to be held to account for later. This will, and it's no comfort to these poor people suffering there in Gaza, this will go down in history as one of the great crimes against humanity in the history of civilization. And Israel will never be able to function as a state in the way it was able to before. What Brazil did, ejecting the ambassadors, is just the beginning. When those images, and certainly I hope there's a deus ex machina. I hope that them coming in with the food and the ports really solves the problem. I think, having seen this for a few months, we have good reason to expect it's not going to solve the problem. And when the images of more and more starving children, as are beginning horrifically to come out now, are revealed to the world, Israel's just never going to be able to function again as a state in good standing. I mean, too many countries, particularly in the global south, in the BRICS countries, are going to break off diplomatic relations and end any kind of trade relationships with Israel. They're going to become very isolated on the world stage.
Yeah. I mean, you're already starting to see that here. When a guy like Chuck Schumer can say Netanyahu has to go, that's how you know that things are changing and that things have changed, which is what he said on the Senate floor. It's an amazing thing to hear, and
they are just desperately. I actually, believe it or not, I'm like 1 degree of separation away from the editor-in-chief of the Forward. For those of you who don't know, the Forward goes back to like the Eastern European immigrants, Jewish immigrants on the Lower East Side. It used to be in Yiddish. That was the most popular newspaper amongst immigrant Jews, and it still exists. I think it's only online now, though. And she wrote a whole article, and I read it, about how in Montclair the protesters were protesting against Israel. And, she's equating, and she was one of the better writers I've read. Like, she actually argued for their right to say these things, which is a lot better than what you see from a lot of them. But still making that equation that this is terrifying to the Jews in this community because the warnings of our grandparents, they love to hit that theme, that the grandparents warned us that this could come back. And we didn't believe them, and now it's a return of anti-Semitism. You know, what I would say is most people are being remarkably nuanced in that regard. I am not seeing a lot of people who don't understand that Israel and Judaism are not the same thing. I would think almost every person protesting Israel would assume all Jews are Zionists. And I'm seeing people being very careful to only critique Israel and not Jews on the
Yeah,
whole.
when we had Matt Orful on, he showed us some of his footage because he was at the big protest in Washington.
Right.
And there were a couple instances of protesters who start saying something about Jews and they stop themselves and they go back and they say Israelis or Zionists, right? Yeah, and look, I think that is no small thanks to guys like Norm, who have been on the air in some forum almost every night since October 7th. And that's not an exaggeration. He is doing some interview somewhere almost every single day for the past 5 or 6 months.
Please clap.